slow motion version of what was happening in the States. I want to see if you still believe that.
Yeah, if you look at Canadian home prices, they have been marching up very slow and steady. I was just looking at the latest Terranet. They're going up at about 5% a year nationally in Canada. Inflation rate in the last 12 months is only 1.5%. So that's 3.5% real inflation in home prices in the last year. But you keep doing that year after year. Do that for 10 years, and you've got like a 40% home price increase. The problem is that Canadian home prices have been doing that for years and years now. So that means that the total appreciation puts them kind of similar to where the U.S. was at the peak of its housing boom before this collapse. So I don't know what's going on, why it's so in Canada, why it's such a steady increase. But home prices have gotten kind of high in Canada, and that's a concern.
Is it unusual, I guess, based on what you've seen in other markets? You mentioned that steady price increase. That's unusual?
Well, it's not particularly, I can't, it's not a bubble. It's not a sudden, sharp increase. It's kind of very unexciting. You cannot notice it, but it accumulates. It's like this, it just accumulates to a big high price level, and eventually it can't just keep going up 3.5% real every year. Unless construction costs or land shortages were strongly at work, but I don't think they're strongly at work. Canada has a lot of land, and I don't see any reason to think construction costs should be going up at that rate. So that means that home prices in Canada are getting higher and higher relative to fundamentals.
I know that a lot of people, as people I've spoken with, who are Canadian economists and Canadians, sometimes will say, look, people who are outside Canada don't understand. Some of the data is perhaps not apples to apples when you compare with the U.S. Like, for example, the price to rent, the rent numbers aren't correct, and therefore, people see it as much more overvalued than it is. Is that a home country bias, or do you think there's some legitimacy with those critiques?
Well, I always feel uncomfortable commenting in other countries because, I'm not a Canada expert. I can't be. There's 193 countries in the world, and I can't be expert on these. When I visited Brazil recently, late last year, I was told that Sao Paulo home prices had just doubled in the last 5 years, and similar in Rio. I thought, well, that doesn't sound right. Why should they have doubled? It sounds like overreaction to the BRIC status that they've gotten in Brazil. But it probably shouldn't double in 5 years. But I got a lot of Brazilians. I said that at a conference in Sao Paulo. I got a lot of resistance from Brazilian economists who said, what do you know about Brazil? So I feel like maybe should I say things like this? I can't do a study in every country that puts me on the forefront of economic reasoning. But I can say that there's always a concern if home prices are rising rapidly. And you always wonder if it makes sense. And I have to leave it at that, because I can't prove whether there's a bubble in Brazil or Canada or not. But I have a general perception about these markets, that they're not always right, that the efficient markets hypothesis is not very applicable to the housing market, and they certainly could be in error and certainly could be in line for a correction.
Well, I promise you we welcome your insight. I will not, we want to hear what you have to say.